There we go. Wonderful. Thank you very much. Thank you for your patience. Okay, and thank you for inviting me to the IMRC 2024. I was here in 2022 and I had a great time. And I believe this year we also have a hybrid conference. So welcome to those of you that are joining online as well as being here in person. My name's Dr. Mandy Moffat, and I'm the Director for the Masters in Medical Education at the University of Dundee in Scotland. And I was asked as part of this closing ceremony to speak about medical education in a globalised world, and how that can shape the future of healthcare through global health. Okay. That skip a slide. Yes, okay. Now, this is what we were all waiting for. I have been advised by my two very helpful student IMRC colleagues that you are used to using Menti here as part of your interaction. So at this point, for those of you that are in the room, and also for those of you who are plugging in from elsewhere, I would invite you to take your phone out or go to the web page and either use the QR code or put in the code for menti.com. Once you're in and you're set in, it shouldn't be closed. I might have to ask for some old-fashioned interaction then from you. Oh, I only opened it this morning and it should be open for 4 days. Okay, let's get going because I'm aware of time, so we can... Anyway, I hope you have had a very good IMRC conference here in 2024. And what I want to look at, now we're at the closing ceremony, and it also links into the previous presentation from the medical education stream, is to give us the opportunity to reflect on your development and learning on global health so far, and think about how you can further develop your knowledge and skills in global health. And I'm going to introduce a couple of frameworks that could help underpin your academic and clinical practice and put that link into the applied side so that you can apply what you've learnt here this weekend at the conference. I'm hoping it will also give you the opportunity, now that we're at the end of these 2 days, to identify some of your existing gaps in your own context and start a plan of action for moving these principles into practice. So I was introduced earlier on. I said I'm Mandy Moffat. I'm the Senior Lecturer in the Centre for Medical Education. I am the Programme Director for our Masters in Medical Education online programme. And my professional identity as an educator. My original degree was in psychology. I did my Ph.D. in general practice in asthma management and started getting involved in educational interventions for health professions. I then started to move into supporting my colleagues who were also faculty in the medical school and started to get involved into faculty development. And my current interests include community building and a sense of belongingness within faculty. So to let you know where I'm coming from, this will put this talk into context for you. I want to talk a little bit about the Masters in Medical Education. It's a very long-running Masters in Medical Education, and we've had graduates for just under 40 years now in our Masters programme. And it could even be that some of you have been taught by alumni from the Masters in Medical Education in Dundee. We have a global educational influence from our alumni network, and it's fabulous when I get the chance to meet up with alumni at conferences like this and hear about the great work that they're doing and what's happening in their medical schools. But back to my talk. I want to think about, well, how can medical education support the future of healthcare and global health? And as I was looking at what are the hot topics in global health at the moment, I had a quick look on the AI Google Health Summary, as we all do, to find out what's happening in an area and a topic of our interest. And over the course of this weekend, you'll have heard presentations from many different angles. Many of you have been involved in research in these areas over the last year that you're presenting at the conference. And again, these are all underpinned by the UN's sustainable goals as well that have been mentioned. I know in our medical education talks in the theme that's been mentioned quite a lot. So I'll go back to look at a definition. As educators, we're always obsessed, and academics thinking about a definition. And Beaglehole and Bonita looked at global health, and they defined global health as a collaborative, transnational research and action for promoting health for all, emphasising the critical need for collaboration. Now, that sounds very familiar after 2 days, doesn't it? By engaging and attending in the IMRC, you are enacting this definition already. And I would invite you to also just reflect in what way your medical school has supported you to develop in global health. For example, the curriculum time to carry out the research projects and to help you be here and present and share your projects at this conference. Now, at this point, if Mentimeter was working, I'd ask you all to just give yourself a little round of applause on the heart. So I'm afraid you're going to have to do that old-fashioned way. So well done. What I was thinking about, and again, the medical education presentation from earlier highlighted this, is what can we do after this weekend is finished? And how can we apply our learning from this weekend going forward? When I looked at just under 20 years ago, Gudrun et al. Looked at global health training and the opportunities in medical education and made a call for global health training to be made more substantive within the curriculum. And I wondered now in 2024, has this call been answered? Now, this would have been again on Mentimeter, no, not at all, or yes, very much so. So those of you that think that it has very much been answered, put your hands up just now. Lots of global health in your medical school curricula? Very quiet. Not much. What about no, not at all? There's no global health in our medical school curricula. So I think basically it's somewhere in the middle. We are aware of how important global health is, but perhaps there is also the opportunity to include more and global health in the future. So when I then start to think, well, has this call for more training and opportunities been provided? It's partially been provided. There are certainly more students getting the opportunity to be involved in international educational activities, and I think this, again, what's happened this weekend has been an example of that, because that work has been done and you've presented it here. However, last year, Patel et al. Started to look at other opportunities, and quite often they are appearing in the study abroad programs, and they're maybe not as impactful as hoped. And Professor Schofield alluded to this at the start in her entry in her lecture this weekend. Patel said that really we need to think about this in a different way and use a different approach and model where it starts to involve faculty and medical school staff as well as students. And there should be more of an exchanging of curricula and more of a conversation and an interaction. And so that's something to start thinking about. How do we do that in the future? How do you do that in the future? Because you will be tomorrow's doctors. You've started it already this weekend, so straight out the gate. So, going back to that definition, how can we support collaborative, transnational research and action for promoting healthcare for all, especially medical educators and those who are involved at looking at the development of doctors and medical schools? And how can we emphasise the critical need for collaboration? How can we support that collaboration? And again, as educators, I'm going to offer you up 2 models and 2 frameworks to help you think about how to take your knowledge and your learning from this weekend further into the future. The first one is a social learning theory. And again, it's been emphasised over this weekend that what we do, we don't do on our own, we do with each other by interacting. Many of the presentations this weekend, I've noticed, have had 3 or 4 names on them. So although as the students, you've been leading that piece of research, you've also been supported by colleagues and faculty. And so this is where we bring in communities of practice, and we use this quite a lot, especially in faculty development that I'm involved in terms of how we develop as educators and how we help educators to develop. So thinking about it in terms of the global health aspect, we have 3 domains in a community of practice: the domain, the practice, and the community. So when I think about the domain of community of practice, this is where members come together, and it's members who are committed in a shared domain of interest. And so in this example, it would be global health. So everybody who's been here this weekend has been interested in global health. You are part of this domain, you're members of this domain. In terms of practice, members share practices and solve problems with each other, drawing on your own expertise and your own practice. And that has been happening as well. This is where the discussions have maybe started prior to this conference, but they've been going on in earnest this weekend. But as well as that, you start to share what you're doing, but you start to build this community, and this is something that then can develop over time. So it's not just one weekend, you go home and you forget all about it, but you keep in touch with people that you've connected with over this weekend, that you get on with, you have a shared interest, you have shared problems. And it's through that community that you start to interact and build relationships. And then if you've got a problem in the future and you think, oh, I think that might be similar, then you can share it and say, how would you approach this problem? And I think this is really key for global health and what we've been talking about over this weekend. We've also talked about the research and the action, and I think highlighted within the domain communities of practice is using a participatory action research approach. And again, emphasising that it doesn't just stop with one research topic. We're always asking, well, what next? What next? Where do you go from here? And to think that in research we have some fabulous randomised controlled trials where you have your start, your finish, and your end. We know in practice it doesn't just end there, it carries on to the next cycle. And this is where I think participatory action research approach can be key for global health. It's used across many domains in education and the social sciences, but it's essentially where people start to become, they answer the questions that they need to answer. Through that community of inquiry, they reflect, they observe the issues that they're having, they reflect on them, they act on them, they then evaluate them, modify their approach, and start to move in new directions. And I think this is a really helpful approach for complex evolving frameworks within a community of practice. And when we look at global health, there's lots of complex issues within that. Only last month, The Lancet, which is one of our main medical journals in the UK, started to look at global health and the issues that climate change is happening. And this was tied in with COP29 happening in Azerbaijan as well. And when I started to think about all of the important topics of global health, underpinning many of that, I think, is the impact of climate change. And that's something that is making itself very much felt with us now, but is going to carry on making itself felt in the very near future. So if it's not impacting you now, it's going to be impacting you quite shortly, and it's certainly starting to impact your patients already. But we can't just stop travelling. When I think about it in terms of, Susie and I have come from the UK on a plane, which in terms of climate change, we had to think long and hard about what we could do when we were here to make the most of our time in Thailand. People have always come together. We've exchanged goods, culture, knowledge. But how can we be mindful of our impact on the climate as we collaborate on global health research and education? I have a picture of Patem National Park here. I don't know if any of you have visited the national park. It's fabulous. They have a great set of rock drawings from, I think, maybe a few thousand years ago. But what really struck me there was that these drawings, rock drawings, appear on rocks across the globe. So even though we have the internet now, and we have planes, and we have trains and cars, even when that didn't exist, people were still travelling and they were still exchanging information. So I don't think we can just put a stop to exchanging information. We just need to work out how we can do it more effectively. So I want to give you an example from an educational project where we were mindful of the travelling, but also we wanted to include a community of practice which covered thinking about global health, not just one locality, but across different countries. It started off at a face-to-face conference, just like this, where I had never met these colleagues from Iceland. I call them colleagues now. These were other participants from Iceland and Germany. So myself and Professor Schofield went to a faculty development workshop at lunchtime. And they said, okay, what's troubling you? What sort of questions have you got around faculty development? And all of us around that table, Austa, Abby and Harm, were saying, well, we're not quite sure that what we produce in terms of our workshops in the university are getting the opportunity to be applied in the clinical educational environments of our clinician colleagues that come in. So we worked on this problem for a while, sharing what we do, our practice, what seems to work, what we're not quite sure if it does work, and the evidence that the literature was drawing in. And then we left. But what happened afterwards, and this is back in 2018, is we started emailing. So we kept our little community of practice going, and we were emailing each other. And I was saying, actually, I think Abby said, well, I've got a PhD to write, and it's not in this particular topic, so I need to concentrate on that. And again, that's communities of practice. People come in to the core community of practice, and sometimes they just stay in the periphery as they have other things to do. So Abby really helped focus at the start. And in came Jordan Napier, who was our faculty development officer. So she added her thoughts, her practices into what happened. I said, well, how can we take this further? And again, we had coffee together. Then we would email the rest of our community of practice for this project. We managed to get some funding from SEDA, which is the Staff and Educational Development Association. And we thought, well, we need to include students as well in this. And so we managed to employ Waji, who's one of our medical students. So he came along and he did a project. So he did a research project around this to look at it. He collected the data, he analysed the data. And if we had an IMRC similar to this, he would have presented it there. Waji had to return to his own educational practice, so he had to leave to go and do his BMSc. But we thought, okay, we're going to have to go and present this somewhere, so we're thinking we'll present it at SEDA. And this was about 2020, where we stopped going anywhere for a while, and quite rightly so. No introduction required. However, with the abstract that we did prepare, we managed to go back to the original conference organisers, who were having a fully virtual conference, and we all met up in one of their virtual rooms. So again, our community of practice came together, but virtually, And even though we hadn't seen each other for a couple of years, we had those bonds there, we had that, those friends. We said, okay, well, how can we take this further? We need to get feedback from more of our community. And at that stage, we were running, and we still run to this day actually, through the Centre for Medical Education, a set of webinars that everyone is welcome to attend. So we put the call out, we ran a webinar, and we introduced our framework for our workshop to practice work that we'd done. Again, getting feedback from everybody and starting to work on that some more. And then eventually, we got a paper published a couple of years later. So this is just a snapshot of a community of practice in action, and how we don't have to be face-to-face all the time, so we can think about that impact in terms of climate. But we're still getting together, we're still collaborating, and we're still acting locally, thinking globally, and trying to increase input from everybody around. So, how can we build effective global health research and action communities whilst reducing our impact on climate? And I guess that's the question I want to ask for all of you who have participated this weekend. What next steps are there? What next steps can you be involved in? And what considerations do you need to make in terms of taking this further? You might think, okay, actually, I want to embed myself in some other countries. Again, thinking about the ethical and effectiveness of that. Your continued collaborations that you've set off this weekend, do they need to be in person, or can you carry them on online? We also spoke in the medical education stream about using technology for interaction and collaborations in virtual spaces and social media. And again, think about who your community is. We included in our community undergraduates, postgraduates, staff development officers, lecturers, professors, so a whole entire age range. Are these appropriate? Do we use WhatsApp groups quite a lot in the UK? That seems to be something that cuts across all different age groups. So does it work outside of the UK? Because there's different types of virtual spaces. And developing that sense of belongingness in this mixed virtual and in-person spaces. But I would now invite you to think about what communities of practice exist already that you can join. I've given you a little bit of hint because you're here already in a community of practice. But are there any other communities of practice focusing on global health that you can join into? So you might be a periphery member just now, but become more of a core member. And that's linking back into this definition where you want to emphasize the critical need for collaboration. And if you can do that within a community of practice, it makes it so much easier. I was thinking, so what would our students do in the UK and in Dundee if they wanted to become a part of a community of practice? And I came across the Students for Global Health community of practice. And I don't know, do they exist in Thailand? Can I see any? Is a yes, no? Have you heard of them? They do have a web address that very much says that they're global. I don't know if they're here though. But within the Global Health, Students for Global Health UK chapter, there's also even a Dundee group as well for our medical students. So of course they come together in this community of practice for global health in Dundee. And they arrange meetings throughout the year. So they start to look at things like electives night and ethical electives and how to get the most of your electives. They also bring in faculty and staff, and they start thinking about, okay, if you're interested in global health, what about postgraduate training opportunities? So they bring people in to talk about those aspects. Also in terms of practice as well, so if you're involved in global health in practice, and there's one here, I don't know if you can, looking at different the practices of global health as well. So that the bottom one is for cervical screening. So if you're involved in that. So again, they're bringing different people into the community of practice to share what they do with each other and go forward. So, thinking outside the box, I have given you a hint already because you're here this weekend. How many global health communities of practice are you already a part of? If you're only one, put up your hand just now. Is this the only community of practice in global health that you're involved in? Okay, yeah, one, okay. What about two? Is anybody involved in a community of practice around global health elsewhere outside of this conference? Oh, really? Okay, we definitely have one. Are there a few of you who are involved in many different global health communities of practice and collaborations across the board? This might, yeah, got one hand up there. So, thinking about what we've been through this weekend, what we've discussed, what we've come together, what we've shared, think about how you're going to apply your learning in terms of going forward today. So, I was really happy to see the medical education talk that was in our session come to this final aspect, because it is about how do you make the most of this conference and other conferences you go in terms of applying your learning going forward. If you're thinking about communities of practice and you're going, okay, we have a small community of practice starting to develop in our medical school. They need to be nourished and they need to be cultivated. So when you leave here today, please keep in mind all of the connections you've made, the things that you've learned, the things that you're thinking about, and what you can apply in practice, because it needs to be needs to be nourished and cultivated. Keep in touch with people that you've made friends with over this weekend. All communities of practice need to be valued by the members. So starting at a conference like this about global health will hopefully keep you in good stead, because you're all here for a reason. You're interested in global health. With the example that I gave you, different members will be involved in different ways at different times, and that's okay. It's a very dynamic model that we use in communities of practice. There was an argument back in the 70s when communities of practice was first put forward in a Ford factory, that they have to be informal, but they don't need to be informal. And I would actually argue that more formal ones can be intentional in their activities. But it can be used as a place to share and innovate and solve problems. So again, that's taking what you've learnt from this weekend and moving it and applying it into practice in the future. And you can use evaluation and research methods to measure the impact of your community of practice. So just as the research that we listened to earlier on today was looking at the IMRC, evaluating it and researching it, you can do the same for any community of practice that you're in. And, as is always the case when you're collaborating, it's great to collaborate with people that you get on really well with, but make sure that you're getting the full range of views in your community. If it's entirely conflict-free, then is it a friends group rather than a community of practice? There may be an element of groupthink. And thinking about involving and being as inclusive as possible in your community of practice, think about the technology that can help support your community of practice and what tools might be best. If you're interested in communities of practice, the Lev and Wengertrainer.com website has got a great introduction to communities of practice. So, you can't share with me because we haven't got Mandy working today, but I would invite you to just take a moment just now to start thinking about your knowledge, your skills, and your attitudes around global health now that we've come to the end of this conference, and think, okay, what do I need to consider going forward around global health and developing my community of practice or that I'm in, and how can I keep this flourishing? How can I keep all this good stuff that's happened over this weekend and nourish it and keep it going into the future? And this was a very short talk because it wasn't very interactive with Mandy, but thank you very much. And if you are interested in any of the frameworks that I've spoken about, please do ask a question now, or come and speak to me, or indeed get in contact with me. I am here as maybe a periphery member, community of practice with the IMRC, but this is my second time I've been invited here, so I feel like I'm part of this community. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the impressive lecture, Dr. Mandy and Dorothy Moffat.